the Statue of Liberty, the Lincoln Memorial, the Parthenon, Stonehenge. One of the things I love most about traveling is seeing awe-inspiring architecture and structures from past centuries or even millennia. You get a real sense of history and of our youth as a country. The Parthenon, for example, has been around almost 2,500 years. Stonehenge goes back even further than that. In 1996, I had the privilege of going to the Holy Land. I joined a group of pastors and their parishioners on a 10-day tour. Together, we saw many of the places associated with the Bible: Jericho, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem. Walking where Jesus walked was an inspiring experience. It might be helpful to put today's reading from our gospel into some context. It was Holy Week. The Passover was near, so Jesus and his followers were in Jerusalem. A few days beforehand, Jesus was welcomed into the holy city with great fanfare and pomp on Palm Sunday. Jesus then spent a couple of days teaching his followers in preparation for his leaving them. It is after a long day of teaching in the temple complex that Jesus' attention is drawn toward the temple's grandeur and beauty. For Jesus' first followers, it would have been unthinkable that the temple should cease to exist. The temple was God's house, the physical reminder that God dwells with his people. However, things can and do happen. Tall, powerful buildings can and do come down. Just 2 months ago, we remembered the 20th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City. Likewise, Herod's Golden Temple did fall under the Romans in 70 AD. Never was the temple rebuilt again. All that remains of Herod's Grand Temple today is what we now know as the Western or Wailing Wall. You've probably seen pictures of people in prayer at the Western Wall. Some even leave little slips of paper with their prayer requests in the crevices of the wall. The wall is considered an especially sacred place because it's all that remains of the temple. Now, this was not the first time the temple was destroyed. Herod's temple is actually the second temple. The first temple, built by King Solomon, was destroyed around 587, 586 BC. That is when Babylon attacked Jerusalem. The leaders of God's people, the royal family, and the priests were then exiled to faraway Babylon. Mark 13 is sometimes called the Little Apocalypse. The tricky part of such end times passages is their vagueness. There is just enough detail given so that people in various times and places can look at the text and see their own times being lived out. You can say, oh yeah, I see that, and that too. Maybe the end is near. However, end times literature is not meant to be taken literally. It's figurative and symbolic. That symbolic nature of apocalyptic literature does not mean that we can just ignore such texts. Jesus, as one scholar points out, is showing the future so that his followers will know how to live in the present and into the future. The common theme of almost all apocalyptic literature in the Bible is that the followers of Jesus must always be at work in watchful readiness for Jesus' return. Jesus' words also seek to focus our attention on what is true and lasting. Our culture tends to value material things like property, possessions, power, and privilege. Jesus reminds us that all of these are fleeting, restricted to this life. You and I cannot take our status or our checkbook with us after we are gone. Ultimately, according to Jesus, the only things that will last are our relationships, both our relationships with one another and our relationship with God. The nature of those relationships here and now plants seed for our relationships in God's eternal kingdom. As Jesus points out in the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 6, don't hoard treasure down here where it gets eaten by moths and corroded by rust, or worse, stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven where it is safe from moth and rust and burglars. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place where you will most want to be and end up being. If our treasure is where our heart is, then the reverse is also true. Where our treasure is, there our heart will be. Reformer Martin Luther wrote that what your heart trusts, what your heart clings to, that is its true God. This is especially true in times of uncertainty, anxiety, or high stress. Tough times reveal what we value most. I invite you to join with me this week in taking time to think about your priorities. Where is your heart? What does your heart cling to when there's nothing else left to cling to? What do you value most? And does your lifestyle, how you live, reveal those priorities to the world? Jesus reminds us that all of the commandments can be summed up in loving God and loving our neighbor. As we seek to build those relationships, we're not just building up relationships for the great by and by in the sky. Jesus also tells us that those relationships are creating God's kingdom right here, right now on earth. Amen.